Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Carolyn Campbell-McLean. I'm your host facilitator for the day, and it's lovely to see you guys. We have 112 people registered for today's event, and obviously we won't get to that number today, but hopefully we get close. It's wonderful to be able to present this seminar to our community, the Neuromuscular Information and Research Day, and we like to call it the NERD because we're a bunch of nerds, aren't we? So welcome everybody, great turnout, and thanks so much to all of you for your time on a Saturday. At least I can look out the window today and say it's not a beautiful sunny day at my house, so that's okay. We're not missing out on too much wonderful weather today. We are due for some rain, so it would be nice to know that there's a little bit of rain coming. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we all meet across Australia. I'm here in Rydalmere near Parramatta, which is the Darug people's land, the Burramuddigal clan, and I'd like to acknowledge their connection to the land, water and community, and pay our respects to elders past and present, and extend my welcome to any First Nations people that we have today in the room with us. So yeah, I'd also like to really acknowledge the really valuable and important experience of people with neuromuscular conditions and their families, and pay my respects to their strength, resilience and sense of community that we have here today. So I'll just start with some quick housekeeping. The event is being recorded so that other people in our community can share we can share that with other people. So if you're not keen on having your face on the recording, you can not share your camera. But having said that, we would love to see as many smiling faces out there as we can. We will be taking some screenshots and photos throughout the event. So again, if you're not keen on having your image on those, then please turn off your camera. Due to the large amount of people today, we've automatically put everybody on mute. I guess unless requested or you're asking a question, you could stay on mute just so that everyone's sound is good. And there is a button at the bottom of your screen to do that. And I'm sure once or twice today we'll hear the phrase, "You're on mute." So that's probably the most common phrase since the pandemic, isn't it? But we will just remind people if they are speaking to make sure that they're not on mute. So what else do I have to tell you today? Comments. So we'd love to hear from everyone where they are and any feedback and comments and questions that they have. So please use the chat box as we go through. You should be able to find the chat box there on your screen and pop those in, and we'd love to hear from people and make sure that we're hearing the feedback and everything. So yeah, wonderful. Thanks for starting us off, Charlotte. Hello. Yeah, we do encourage questions. Like, we'd really like to make this as useful and relevant to the community and the audience as possible. So please put questions in there. And if you have any problems with tech, you could also put those in the chat box, and someone, hopefully Charlotte or Jess, my wonderful colleagues that are here today, will be able to assist. So when people are speaking, like the presenters are speaking, you can switch to speaker view so that you'll just see their face. At the moment, I can see everyone's face, so that's great. I just also like to say that some of the topics we talk about today might be tricky or hard for people, and we just remind people that you can always turn down the volume or just pop out if you need to. You can always talk to services on the phone like MD New South Wales or Lifeline if needed. So yeah, we'll pop some numbers in the chat if anyone's feeling like that they are triggered by any of the topics that we raised today. So now let's kick off with the program, the fun stuff. We've got quite a big program today. We've extended the length of this session because last year we ran out of time, and so we've also popped in lots of content for everybody. So we'll be kicking off today with a wonderful presentation from our friend Dr. Michelle Lorenzos, and she'll be talking about new and emerging treatments for neuromusculars. So I think that's something probably everyone will want to hear about. And then we'll be following by 3 different topics. So we've got advocacy, swallowing, and reproductive options. So hopefully they're of interest to people. After those sessions, we'll take questions and we'll have a 15-minute break, and we'll come back for our breakout sessions. And they're on 3 different condition-specific topics, which is limb girdles and Becker's, SMA, and FSHD. So most of you will have been pre-allocated to those sessions, but anyone who's recently joined and hasn't been allocated or doesn't end up in the right breakout room, we'll be able to sort that out at the time. So there we go. We'll also have the highlight of the program, which is what I've, always think is the highlight of the day, which is hearing from our young leaders for the lived experience panel. So we're going to hear from Dan, Julie, and Tate later on, and I'm sure they'll be fantastic and being able to share lots of tips and advice for our community. So it'll be great to get to them, and hopefully not run out of time like we did before. So yeah, all right, great. Well, let's get started then. I'd like to introduce Dr. Michelle Lorenzos. She is the clinical trials medical lead at the Children's Hospital Westmead. And she provides a lot of leadership and advocacy for the Sydney Children's Hospitals network. She's a paediatric neurologist, which she has a specific interest in Duchenne, and she's doing a lot of research in that work at the moment. She's done a PhD, which was improving and understanding the psychological condition, which is really important to balance that with the physical issues of young people with neuromuscular conditions. So I'd like to welcome everybody. Michelle, could everyone welcome Michelle Lorenzos? Thanks, Michelle. Yay. Oh, that's good. Clapping, silent clapping. We love that. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. Oh, hang on. Where did my... Let me just make sure this is open and try this again. It worked in the practice. Sorry.
Of course it worked in the practice.
Of course, it worked a minute ago. Where are we? Okay, Zoom. Share screen. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, it's coming up now.
Great. Okay. Well, hang on. Go back to my start of it. Hello, everybody. So great to be here this afternoon. Thank you for asking me to speak. As Carolyn mentioned, I'm a paediatric neurologist. So I'm a medical doctor who works primarily with children and adolescents, well, actually only with children and adolescents, who have nerve, brain, and muscle diseases, but my particular focus is in the neuromuscular area and in clinical trials. And for the last couple of years, in addition to being a doctor, taking care of patients and running clinical trials, I've also been in the position of clinical trials medical lead. So that's across the whole hospital, not just neuromuscular, but looking at how we can increase our involvement really to get patients onto trials and with therapies sooner. So it is a real pleasure to be speaking about this topic today. It is a big topic, and it's hard to cover absolutely everything, which is actually, I reflected on that, it's kind of a positive thing that there's enough going on in terms of emerging treatments that it's hard to cover everything in a half-hour presentation, even though Carolyn's kind of given me like 5 minutes bonus at the beginning. So I'm going to try and talk about what I think are the useful things to know in terms of treatment pipelines, a few general things. I'm going to talk quite a little about AAV gene therapies, because that's kind of a very active space in a number of neuromuscular diseases, and then touch on a few specific therapies that are coming across a few different disorders. So just to mention, I work in clinical trials. I'm an investigator on a number of trials that are funded by industry, but I don't receive any personal revenue from those trials. And I've contributed to some advisory boards in the past. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about the Australian treatment pipeline and process, just to provide a bit of context for what we talk about when we talk about new and emerging therapies. Talk about AAV gene therapy, because there's a lot of hype and hope around that at the moment, and kind of get some of those important principles about gene therapies across. And so I briefly discuss some other treatments in DMD, SMA, myotonic dystrophy type 1, LGMD, but I won't go into them in too much detail, because I know for some of these conditions there are separate breakout rooms where you'll probably discuss things in a more pragmatic way. So I think this is probably not news to those of you who work or live with neuromuscular conditions, but they're actually more common than people often think. So there's an estimated 40,000 Australians living with one or more neuromuscular condition, and muscular nerve disorders affect at least 1 in 1,000 children in Australia. So whilst they are kind of regarded individually as rare diseases, they're not they're not incredibly rare, and many people are affected. And so there is an impetus to see how we can actually bring new treatments to people. And it's fortunately an area where a number of pharmaceutical companies are quite focused on progressing further with treatments. I will just also mention that because I'm a pediatric person, I often refer to children and families and parents out of habit, but a lot of what I say is relevant across the various, I guess, stages of life. And I don't expect anyone to be able to read this slide because it's so small, but the point of it is to say that alongside all the new and alongside emerging treatments, the core of treatment and the best evidence around neuromuscular disease at present still remains good multidisciplinary care. And that means working with your specialists, GPs, physios, OTs, psychologists. And I know that's sometimes easier said than done. And sometimes it's difficult to find people who really understand your neuromuscular condition. But I think we need to remember that there's a lot that goes on in just keeping you well and keeping you as comfortable as possible, even before we start thinking about new and fancy pharmacotherapies. And so this is looking at a patient with DMD and all the various things we do in clinic, but it could really apply to myotonic dystrophy, to FSHD and many other conditions as well, how we think about those various aspects of diagnostics, rehab, orthopedics, psychosocial, cardiac, respiratory for the conditions that affect cardiorespiratory issues as well, GI and swallowing. So if you are living with a neuromuscular disease, or if you are looking after someone with a neuromuscular disease and you feel like you're basically the CEO of a big company, then it's no wonder, because there's a lot of different facets that you're having to manage all the time. So when we move away then from thinking multidisciplinary and we think about how you treat a genetic disease, this is a massive oversimplification, but basically there are three main ways you can treat the symptoms that the gene causes. And I actually forgot to say at the start of this slide, which is important, which is that most neuromuscular diseases are genetic in nature. And in fact, most are caused by a single gene. So we call those monogenic disorders, which basically means there's a mistake or a spelling mistake or a mutation in a gene that affects the way parts of the body are doing the job they're able to do. So usually it's affecting the way a cell does something, and that might be a muscle cell or a nerve cell, and that causes the symptoms. So if we think about that backwards, we can manage the symptoms that the gene causes, and that's what a lot of our treatments do. We can change the way a gene is expressed. So that means if you think about the gene as being an error in a gene as being a spelling mistake, you can kind of train the body to reread that spelling mistake. Or you can go back to the actual original mistake and try and rub it out and rewrite it, or change or replace the gene. And so that's just an important way of thinking about how different therapies work. Now, I just do want to mention a couple of slides about clinical trials, and this is a little bit dry, but it's so important when we talk about new and therapies.
Do you want to go to the bathroom?
Might just ask people to maybe mute if you haven't muted, because there's a bit of dialogue that we're hearing, which I don't think is meant for everybody. So most drugs are investigated in clinical trials, and I think it's just important to speak about this context, because when we start talking about new treatments, and I know when I speak to families in clinic, people often, the first thing is, well, how soon before this gets on the shelf, basically? If there's something new that's even being thought about and being tried in mouse models, how soon before we actually can give it? And the question is often not all that soon. It takes some time. And when we talk about new and emerging treatments, the traditional way that these come across is through clinical trials. And a couple of things about clinical trials that you may be very well aware of or might be new to you is that the way they tend to work, particularly in Australia, is that they're usually run by pharmaceutical companies. That might be Pfizer, Sarepta, Novartis, Dyne, any of those. And usually as hospitals, we work as a site with the companies. Now, most trials, and not all of them, use randomization and a placebo arm. And this can seem quite frustrating to families and to patients. But what that really means is, in order to know how well something works, they give it to a group of patients. But they also have another group of patients that get the placebo, or almost the fake version of the medicine. So you can monitor those and then monitor the difference. Now, clinical trials have really strict criteria. So as a doctor who works in clinical trials, I can't just put all of my patients on a clinical trial, even though I think maybe it might help them. But there's usually very strict criteria about the ages of the child. It might be about the genetic mutation. It might be about their functional ability. And that's something important to make sure that we have standardized information. And sometimes there is an opportunity to receive access through the drug at the end of that clinical trial through what we call an extended or a compassionate access. But that's not always the case. And so it can't necessarily be guaranteed. And when we think about clinical trials, how they work, I won't spend long on this, but basically you start off with what we think of phase 0. And actually they show somebody kind of looking at a person, but often we think about these preclinical stages as laboratory studies. So that might be where they do some things in test tubes to look at their drug, or they give it to some mouse models or some monkey models, and they see what actually happens. And then they have to do very, very, very small and short studies where they say, well, if we take a handful of people who don't even have the disease, people who do have the disease, but a very small number, how safe is it going to be? And then we move on to phase 2, 3, and 3 trials, where we're actually looking at larger numbers of people. And so all those steps have to happen in order for things to be considered safe to go to the next step, because we don't want to be trying something on, 2,000 people. If had we given it to 2 or 3 at the beginning, we may have realized that it caused a catastrophic adverse event. And really, before that clinical trial goes to a standard therapy, a few things have to be thought about. And while they are clinical trials and not standard therapies, there's a whole lot of things we don't know about these treatments. And I guess I just want to provide this context so that if you do hear about clinical trials coming up, that that it's very clear that when we think about clinical trials, we don't always know whether the drug is going to work. In fact, if we knew for certain that it was going to work really well, we wouldn't have to do the trial. The risks are uncertain, and often even how much drug we need is going to be uncertain. So often we've trialed medications at different stages or different doses. And so basically, for it to progress on and to become a new therapy, it needs to be safe. And doesn't mean it can't have any side effects, but those side effects need to be seen to be in balance with any benefits. And it needs to be shown to be efficacious. And efficacious usually means that it's as good, but usually better than whatever else is out there. There needs to be, and so that's why I'm saying it needs to be at least as good as the current treatment. And generally, before we can actually start prescribing it, it needs to be approved. But that means in Australia, the TGA needs to say, yes, we think this is a reasonable treatment. Or in America, it's the FDA. And as many of you may be aware, the FDA does tend to be a little bit more lenient than the TGA. And then, of course, someone needs to pay for the drug. And many of these new drugs that I'm talking about today are really quite expensive. So we're talking $500,000 a year, $800,000 a year, or even $2 or $3 million a dose. So even if it's approved, we need to think about how somebody's going to pay for that. So is the government actually going to put it on what we call the PBS, or is the company going to provide it? Sorry, I realized I've written as at the end of that, which doesn't mean anything, but is the company going to provide it compassionately? Because often those amounts are too high for individuals to be able to afford. Okay, so that's kind of the context. So now I'm going to talk about AAV gene replacement therapy, because it's an area where things are very active in terms of treatments. And I think a very exciting area that I'm working quite a lot in, but it's also complicated and not without its problems. So what is AAV? So when we talk about gene therapy, so if we go back to the fact that a gene is like the instructions that your body has, which basically tell your body whether you're going to have blue eyes or brown eyes, or whether you're going to be tall or short or look like your parents, but also whether you're going to have Duchenne muscular dystrophy or myotonic dystrophy type 1. So gene replacement therapy is about saying we're going to take another copy of a gene, basically a healthy copy, and replace or provide a transfer to into the body. And so it's able to do the job the other gene's able to do. We don't generally take the faulty gene away. It just stays there. Okay. But one of the ways of doing this is to use something called AAV gene replacement therapy. And so those letters AAV, what do they mean? Basically, AAV is a type of virus, and the proper name is adeno-associated virus. So it's a very little virus that tends to occur in humans and doesn't make them particularly sick. Often when people hear it, and I have to confess, as a medical person, for the first few times I heard it, I just assumed it was the same as something called adenovirus, which is quite a common virus also in people. But that virus does make you a bit sick. It gives you like a bit of a cold. It can give you conjunctivitis. It can give you gastro. So adenovirus is different. And the reason this one's called adeno-associated virus is basically because scientists are a fairly unimaginative bunch, and they found it with adenovirus. So they just called it that. And there's at least 12 natural serotypes, and also people are now making kind of engineered versions. And basically, because of those reasons, that it doesn't make you particularly sick, and there's a few different serotypes that will target different types of tissues, it can be used as a vehicle to deliver a new gene into the body. And that's why we call them AAV gene replacement therapies. So the reason they'd use AAV, as opposed to why use AAV, why not use the influenza virus or, the herpes virus or the rhinovirus, which just causes a runny nose in most people. And there's a few reasons why. So it's been shown not to cause disease in humans. So we don't want to give people something if it's going to make them really sick, because that defeats the purpose. And they don't cause a huge immune response. So what we mean by that is when you give someone a virus, so even if you give them a live vaccine is a good example of that. So for example, like the varicella vaccination, I think is live. Maybe I might, but the measles vaccination is live. I'm not sure about that one. So when you give someone a live vaccine, you give them a little bit and then it causes their body to have an immune system. And that's what kind of makes them immune from then on. But sometimes when you have an immune system, it's a response. It's why when you have a vaccination, you might get a bit of a fever or feel a bit crappy. Your body's responding to the fact that you're getting something new. Sometimes with certain viruses, that immune response in itself can make you very sick. And so relatively speaking, AAV doesn't seem to have as much of an immune kind of response, but it still has some, and that can be a problem. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And they don't spread particularly easily. So they're not viruses, if you give it to one person, it's not thought to be like, COVID or swine flu, you give it to one person, everyone's going to have it within, 3 or 4 days. But there are some problems with it. And one of the problems is it actually does occur in humans even before you start giving any gene replacement therapies. And we don't know quite how common it is, because up until recently, no one's ever really cared about the AAV, but it's thought to be between about 30 to 80%. And that's a pretty big range. And the difficulty is if you've already had the virus before, then it's and you've got some antibodies there, then it's unlikely this kind of gene replacement therapy will work. So it's also a small virus, and small is good because it, you can get it into people, but small means there's only so much it can carry. And the other thing is the antibodies seem to hang around for a long time. So once you've had AAV and you have antibodies, you don't tend to clear them very easily. And I've mentioned already that having those antibodies can be a problem. So I'm going to talk about Duchenne as an example, and also because there's no other kind of breakout sessions for Duchenne, but I'm going to use this as an example to talk a bit about how we use AAV gene therapy. And the other reason is because this is what I work mostly on. So Duchenne's an X-linked disorder. And I think for the purpose of this talk, the important part about it is that it's caused by a problem on the dystrophin gene that turns healthy muscle into fat and fibrotic muscle. And so over time you get weakness. And so it's caused by this particular gene called the dystrophin gene, which has got 79 exons. And as I mentioned earlier, it's on the X chromosome. So just like I talked about earlier, you can have a treatment that actually treats the actual symptoms and addresses the muscle scarring or injury, or tries to prevent inflammation or injury. And that's what steroids do, which we use to treat Duchenne. You can actually treat the way it reads the mistake. And that's what some of the therapies like exon therapies do, or you can actually replace the gene in itself. So we use the adenovirus vector as the transport medium, put the new gene in, give it to the patient. That goes in the cytoplasm, is the outside part of the cell, but then it gets into the nucleus, which is the part that actually kind of does all the important thinking of it and making that a cell needs. And then it allows the cells to actually do what they need to do. And in Duchenne, they need to make a product called dystrophin, which is a protein. So without the new gene, they have a lot of trouble doing that. But with the new gene, ideally, if the treatment works, they're able to make this protein and prevent muscle breakdown. Now, this kind of applies to a number of neuromuscular diseases, not just DMD, but when you're talking about giving new gene to help with muscle, that's not straightforward. So there's been over 250 clinical trials of AAV therapies in other conditions. So hemophilia, for example, is one example. But if you think about it, muscle is something that your body has a lot of. And so even small people, they have a lot more muscle than they do things like, liver. And so you need to get a dose that's going to be big enough to be taken up by all of those muscle cells. And the other thing is that usually by the time we diagnose these conditions, it's because the patient's showing symptoms. So they've already had some muscle injury. And even if you give a new gene, it might stop that injury progressing, but it won't reverse it. The other thing is muscle is always regenerating, so you go to the, if somebody has a workout at the gym and lifts a weight and tears a muscle, that can regenerate and grow back. That's how you get, bigger muscles. So over time, are you going to dilute the actual benefit of it? And the other thing, with at least in Duchenne, the dystrophin gene is about 500 times bigger than the little virus that's supposed to be carrying it. So it's about sometimes compared to an actual real aeroplane trying to be carried in on a little model aeroplane. And for all those reasons, it's complicated. The other thing is that if you have AAV antibodies, and I mentioned earlier that 30 to 80% of people have AAV antibodies, then it means that the gene replacement therapy is probably not going to work. So you can't be a candidate for this therapy. And one of the other really complicated things is once you've given it to somebody, you can't take it out again. And so that's another factor. You can't undo it as a treatment. And it lasts, essentially, we think it's going to last for that person's whole life. So it's not like giving an oral treatment that might wear off in 3 or 4 days. We have to give doses of about 200 trillion vector genomes. And when I think of that many zeros, I think it's hard to kind of contemplate. But basically, one way of thinking about it is that if every vector genome was a 5-cent coin and you balance them all on top of each other, it would get to the sun. So big numbers. There are also considerable risks of AAV gene therapy. And so deaths have been reported, usually in the earlier stages when they have tried. So for example, in Duchenne, when they first started dosing older patients. So when I say older, I mean older pediatric patients. So not old by our standards. But there was a 16-year-old man who developed inflammation of the heart and unfortunately passed away after an AAV gene therapy. And there are a number of other cases where patients experience quite serious inflammation of the heart, injury to liver, muscles or kidney. And usually, fortunately, these side effects can be detected quite early because we have a lot of safety assessments that we put around giving AAV gene therapy. But that may mean the patient has to stay in hospital for longer, need additional procedures, or even some long-term treatments. And some of those are quite strong immunosuppressive treatments. Many children, or adults for that matter, who've received AAV gene therapy can get milder side effects such as vomiting, nausea, loss of appetite, and makes them feel crummy. And the other thing is, because you're giving something that's going to mount an immune response, patients need to take steroids for several weeks or months following gene replacement therapy. So essentially, it's something that we are seeing play out in clinical trials with some benefit, but it is a really serious treatment to think about. And I think it's just important to get that across so that when we think about what's coming and some of the positive results that are seen, people do understand that they're not treatments that should be considered lightly. And as doctors, when we think about AAV gene clinical trials or AAV gene therapy treatments, we really have to think very carefully about the risks versus the benefits. So in DMD specifically, there has been a number of early phase trials in gene therapy, and currently there is a phase 3 trial undergoing for patients who are 4 to 7 years of age. And these little boys were in the news a couple of weeks ago because they are part of a phase 2 trial, so a smaller number of patients trying Pfizer gene therapy occurring between patients of the age of 2 to 4 years of age. And there's only 10 spots in the world for that trial, and it's now complete, that the recruitment has been complete, but we're still waiting for the results. What they have seen, though, in the early phase data is that the increase in dystrophin, so that the muscle cell's ability to make that protein it needs, has been dramatically increased by receiving gene replacement therapy, in much higher levels that we've seen in other treatments that have been tried before. However, we don't know how long that's going to last. So we still need to really wait and see. Many of you who have any interest in the DMD world would know that the FDA has recently granted conditional approval for a Sarepta gene therapy for DMD for patients who are 4 to 5 years of age. And so boys who are 4 to 5, so often in that early stage of diagnosis, will be able to receive Sarepta gene therapy in the States, provided that it's paid for. And that's often a significant issue still. Sometimes insurance companies are happy to pay for that. Sarepta are going to, as far as we've been told, apply to the TGA for approval as well, but we're not positive yet of the timeline or whether that will be successful. So I'll just talk about a couple of other treatments in DMD quickly and then move on to some other conditions. So just briefly, it is worth mentioning that not all the treatments we focus on are all about skeletal muscles. So ACE inhibitors, and we tend to use perindopril, have been shown to be very helpful for cardiac protection, which means you can start them even before the patient is showing signs of significant signs of cardiac weakness or functional problems. Sometimes families say to us, oh, but it's yet another medication and they're already taking steroids and vitamin D, but really it's really well tolerated. So it would generally be our advice that if your local doctor, or if your neuromuscular doctor, I should say, or cardiologist is thinking about ACE inhibitors, there is evidence to show they can be very helpful. Vamorolone is a synthetic steroid that has been used in clinical trials and has been shown to be quite effective. So it's been shown to be as effective as the normal steroids we prescribe. So you might think, well, why bother? And that's because it has been shown to be much better in terms of side effects. So patients don't put on as much weight, they grow taller. We're still waiting to see whether it's going to help with bone health. So far, you can only get vamorolone if you've been on a clinical trial for it, but it is likely that they will be applying for FDA and hopefully TGA approval in the next 12 to 18 months. Other drugs can impact, and this is where we think about the instructions and the reading of the gene. So there's a drug called ataluren, and this works on something called nonsense mutation. So basically when the spelling mistake causes the gene to stop, and so the protein isn't made because the message is not getting through, and it's thought to occur in about 10 to 15% of patients. The basically important part of this slide is that ataluren has been shown to be really quite safe, tolerated very well. It seems to be delaying loss of ambulation by about 5 years, which is significant given the fact that loss of ambulation may occur usually in early adolescence. If we can push it out to late adolescence, that's really positive. It's also so far, I should say, about ataluren, still only available in Australia if you've been on a clinical trial. It is approved as a therapy in Europe by the EMA, and the company PTC have told us that they will be looking to apply for TGA approval again in the next year or two. Other exon skipping drugs are also important, and exon skipping is also a possibility in other neuromuscular diseases where there's deletions. And basically the way it works is, again, this is a busy slide, but you can see here that this person has a deletion. This is obviously a kind of analogy, which has meant a section has been taken out of their instructions or sentence, but you can still really read the rest of the sentence. It still doesn't mean the same thing, and it's still a shorter sentence, but you can read it and it makes sense. So the mad cat ate the fat rat, and the big bat has been turned into the mad cat ate the big bat. Whereas you can see here what happens, here when you've just lost even though this deletion is smaller, what it does is if you take away the F and the A and you push everything forward, then whatever comes there is just gobbledygook. It makes no sense at all. So a smaller deletion can actually be more significant in how it actually allows the body to follow the gene's instructions. And we call these ones out of frame errors, and they tend to make the condition more severe. And really, when we think of Duchenne, it's almost always, it's not exactly like this, but almost always an out of frame issue. And so exon skipping basically works by turning this more severe spelling mistake into a less severe one. I might not go into all of this because I don't want to take too long. But there are 3 of these in particular areas of exon deletions that have been focused on, and ones that allow you to skip over exon 45, skip over exon 51, skip over exon 53. How am I going for time? I probably might have time to explain this actually, which will make this part make more sense.
Yeah, a little bit more time.
Yeah, good. I checked my time because I'm conscious of not spending my whole time on Duchenne.
That's okay. We started early. So,
yeah, good. Okay. Well, because otherwise this part doesn't really make sense. But so when we think about exon skipping, and I say this because often even medical people will, who don't work in neuromuscular, often have the slightly wrong idea about this. People often think, okay, if you have an exon 45 deletion, then you take an exon 45 skipping drug, and that's not what it means. What it means is, so this person has what we call an out of frame deletion. They've got a deletion of 46 and 47. Now, if you were to pretend that black box isn't there for a second and that 45 is still there. If you tried matching up 48 here with 45, those pieces can't fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. So we call that an out of frame deletion. What the exon skipping does is it skips over 45. It adds that black box. And so now we can try and join 48 to 44 and see those pieces do add up like a jigsaw puzzle. And so that's by skipping over, not the part that's deleted, but the part that flanks the deletion, the part that's next to the deletion, can turn these into less severe types. And in terms of updates, there's a number of these. So casimersen, eteplirsen, vidalarsen, and goldelursen that have all been approved actually in the United States, but they've got something called conditional approval, which means that the drug company says, we don't know for sure that this works. You haven't finished all your phase 3 trials on your lots of patients, but your earlier phase trials suggest that it might do something positive to the dystrophin level and it might work. And given that this is a serious condition where there's not really many other treatments available, they're allowed to then prescribe it and sell it. Again, cost is sometimes an issue. So these therapies are usually around $750,000 per year, and you need to give them ongoing. So patients who have insurance often get access, but in the States, finance can be a barrier. At the moment in Australia, they're only available on clinical trials or through compassionate access once you've finished a trial. They're also a bit of a nuisance because they require infusions every single week. So patients have to come to hospital and get a cannula put in. We do have one patient that's on a clinical trial at home, but they still have to have a home nurse come every week. And the main toxicity problem has been thought to be with kidneys. But generally, again, they're pretty well tolerated. And you can watch in terms of any potential kidney damage and stop the treatment if that's occurring. One of the things that's exciting is companies are recognizing that it's a pain having an infusion every week, but more importantly, often the doses that you need to get high enough to give good treatments are the same doses that seem to be teetering up there and causing side effects and problems. And so one of the things they've tried to work out is how can we get the good stuff of this drug directly into the muscle and cause less effect outside of that? And so companies like Sarepta and Dyne and others and Biomarin are all looking at different ways to do that. And they're using what I think of as second generation kind of exon skipping. And a number of those clinical trials are now starting. There's a phase 1, I think a 2-3 trial for Dyne. So at the moment, and there's also ongoing trials with Sarepta and Biomarin as well. And so most of those, because they're able to get this thing straight to the muscle at a better dose, it also means that you don't have to give them every week. They're moving more to every month. But all of those treatments are currently in clinical trials only. So that's kind of the Duchenne focus. I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about a few other conditions and what's happening. So myotonic dystrophy is a form of muscular dystrophy that results in muscle weakness and myotonia, and which means that you can't relax your muscle. Those of you who have it don't need me to explain it, but those of you who don't have experience with it, it means so if you were to shake someone's hand, it can actually be difficult to let go. But can also be associated with cardiac arrhythmias as well as some other brain issues as well, although people tend to have overall intelligence overall, but it can cause some issues in terms of thinking and behavior. So it's also
have about 5 more minutes, Michelle, if that's okay.
Excellent. Yeah, no problem. And so there are currently clinical trials underway in myotonic dystrophy. Tidaglosib is actually a drug that's used primarily to treat Alzheimer's, but there's a phase 3 trial that has finished recruitment, but the data collection is ongoing. And so far in the early phases, or I should say in the mouse models, it's been shown to improve muscle strength and reduce myotonia. And it's generally thought to be quite well tolerated. Metformin and mexiletine are other drugs that are used in quite commonly in other treatments, but are also currently in trials for myotonic dystrophy. SMA is another genetic condition, and there's a section breakout session on that today, so I won't go into it too much, but it basically caused by something called a problem with the SMN gene. And there's a couple of things that have been, these aren't too new, but just for those of you who may not be aware, nusinersen and risdiplam, which are both treatments that actually change the expression of the gene, which are shown to be highly effective. But even more exciting has been Zolgensma, the AAV gene therapy. And this works very similarly to the AAV gene therapy that we talked about in Duchenne, except it's actually replacing the genes that are important for motor neurons instead of muscle. So all those therapies I just mentioned, risdiplam, nusinersen, and Zolgensma, are actually approved and funded by the PBS, but in certain conditions. And so, moving on to limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, again, there's a breakout session on this, so I won't spend too long, but there are AAV gene therapies currently in clinical trials for 2E and 2B, which are certain subtypes of LGMD. And so at the moment, I think the 2E one has just started recruiting. So what else is in the pipeline? These are some just general things just quickly in my last couple of minutes. So people often ask about gene editing or CRISPR. So this is a technology where you actually use something to snip parts of the gene. So rather than replacing the gene, you're essentially repairing a gene to allow it to do its job. At the moment, there have been a few human trials in non-neuromuscular conditions. So I think hereditary angioedema is one example. But so far in neuromuscular, it's still more preclinical. There's not clinical trials per se with human subjects yet, but we'll watch this space. Another thing that's really important thinking about new treatments is the value of good data and accurate diagnosis. So often when companies start thinking about, is it worth doing a trial in this particular disease, they want to know how many patients in the world have it, because otherwise there's not the incentive to do it. And also they don't know how they're going to get enough patients for their trial. But even more importantly, for Australia, it's important that we know how many patients we have with these conditions, because then we can convince the companies to do their trials here. If we don't know how many patients we have, it's harder to make that argument to get the trials to Australia first and foremost. So I would encourage people to register with the Australian Neuromuscular Disease Registry. And if you haven't seen your doctor in some time because basically you got fed up with going for follow-up appointments and nothing has been happening, I would encourage people to just check in, because there has been changes in terms of what we know about many of these conditions. And probably the last thing that I think that we're getting much better at and doing more of is actually saying, when we measure how well something works, how do we measure it? So historically, we would measure it by maybe saying how far can someone walk, or how far can they put their hands above their head, and there's standardized assessments for that. But what we're finding is that people want to know, well, how does it help me in terms of my swallowing? Or how does it help me in terms of my breathing? Or how does it help me in terms of being able to get out of my house and go places? And so we're starting to use more of what we call patient-reported outcome measurements. It's really important, though, that those are agreed upon internationally and standardized, because otherwise, if I ask my patients, how are you going pushing a shopping trolley, for instance, and somebody else is asking their patients how are they going being able to, get their hands above their head to use a hairdryer, then we can't compare results. So one of the focuses that's become really important now is saying, let's ask our patients what matters to them, but let's agree on how we're going to record those so we can get meaningful data. And finally, my last slide is just saying, I know what you want to hear from me. Well, actually, I don't know, that's presumptuous, but I presume what you want to hear from me is that there's new treatments coming. And I think that's really important. But working in this area every day, I also think I just wanted to pass on. I have no idea what it's like to live with a neuromuscular disease or to parent a child, but having met a lot of, I know what it's like to parent a child, I should say, just not one with a neuromuscular disease. And I imagine that has so many more challenges and complexities, as well as its obvious privileges and rewards. But what I can see in my families who work through these things is that deciding about treatments on trials for yourself or for your child is stressful. There's so much information, so much uncertainty, things coming at you all the time. And so a few things that I think that I'm finding is really important for families I work with is talk to your doctor. So when you see stuff or you read about it, don't be afraid to take it to the doctor that you trust and see, well, what do you think about this? Or, is this something I can access? If you feel like you'd need a second opinion, please get one. And we don't mind. I've had patients who've seen me and heard all about trials, but then they've said, I'm just still not sure. And I've said, go and see one of my colleagues elsewhere. And just to hear from them that the landscape is the same, they're not missing out on things. And often they'll come back and say, yeah, he was great, but he said exactly what you've said. And so that's fine to go and make sure that you've done all your homework. We understand that. And we'd rather you talk to us about that. Surround yourself with constructive and supportive people. And by that, I mean people who are your friends or family who will talk to you about what's new and what's coming, but also recognize that perhaps giving you every piece of paper that's come out of every part of the world about every, new vitamin can sometimes actually make things worse. If you've got people who are saying to you, I read something the other day that if you eat kiwi fruit, you can cure, SMA, then there are people that you sometimes just have to say, look, I've got my doctor I talk to about this stuff, and you work out what your boundaries are. But at the same time, it is great to also have people who are on your team and looking out for new opportunities. Try to separate the hope from the hype. There's a lot of good stuff happening, but it's also really important that we recognize there's complexities and that things take time. Be prepared for uncertainty as much as you can be, but I know that's really easier said than done. And of course, if this whole process of weighing up the pros and cons and thinking about treatments and going through the roller coaster is causing you stress, then consider seeking some professional support for that as well. And I would just say be kind to yourself through this process, because it is a long one and often a frustrating one. So thank you very much for your time. And if there is any time, I think I'm almost out of time for questions, but I'll leave that to Carolyn to decide.
Michelle, that was fantastic. Could everyone please thank Michelle for her excellent knowledge, but not only that, her really good bedside manner. I think those last few tips that you gave in your slide were absolute gold advice for all of us. I know that I've been coming to these seminars for like 20 plus years, And what I think we get from them is a sense of hope and a sense that there are things happening in the world and in Australia with all of these types of treatments. So I wrote down a lot of them. I won't say them because you said them a lot more eloquently than I would, but I want to thank you, Michelle, for that. Is there questions that we have from the room? Because I think that we have just a couple of minutes for anything specifically relating to Michelle's presentation. We've got some feedback in the room that people are saying it was really interesting and helpful. So thank you. Thank you very much, Michelle. Is there any other particular questions that we will go, or we move straight on to our next presentation? I think that's a really, really great place to start today. So thank you so much, Michelle, for that information. And I couldn't get my head around the 200 million. 200 trillion it was, wasn't it? 200
trillion.
Wow. However much that is just amazing. So it's amazing that there's so many bright minds doing this research. And I loved also how you had said at the beginning, do you ever feel like a CEO of your own person or your own family member, your own self? I think absolutely we all do. And we're juggling, people at families are juggling so many things. And yeah, but I thank you for making that also informative and helpful.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Great, Michelle. Thanks. Feel free to stick around if you can. There might be some questions in a little while. Otherwise, we know you have a busy Saturday to get to. So thank you. Great. Excellent. Now for a little bit of a change of pace, I'd like to introduce our next speaker is Alice Batchelor. Whenever I say your surname, Alice, I think of a TV show. I don't know why. Alice, you are a Policy and Engagement Officer at the Physical Disability Council. And you're the Physical Disability Council, PDCN, for those of you who don't know, represent the rights and interests of people with physical disability across New South Wales, and they're a partner of Muscular Dystrophy New South Wales. Alice, you've been particularly working on accessible housing and inclusive transport, which are very, very hot topics at the moment. You also live with your partner who has a neuromuscular condition himself. So it's wonderful that you're actually part of our community as well, more so than I would have thought. So thank you very much, Alice, for presenting today on advocacy for change and getting people a little bit hyped up about what we can do to make things better for people with neuromuscular conditions. So over to you, Alice.
Thanks, Carolyn. It's a really, really good introduction. A tough act to follow after Michelle's presentation, but I'll try my best. Let me just get my presentation. Okay. So I firstly want to acknowledge that I'm on Darug Gringo land today, and pay my respects to the Indigenous people of this land. So as Carolyn introduced me, I'm Alice. I'm the Policy and Engagement Officer at PDCN, and my role is that I work to identify issues affecting people with physical disability and create positive change through advocating to government or the private sector and pretty much whoever's best placed to make positive change. So who is PDCN? We are the peak systemic advocacy organisation in New South Wales representing people with physical disability. We act as a non-government organisation and work within the community sector. And while we have important relationships with government, our work is independent of government. We're run by and informed by majority people with lived experience of physical disability, and we work to create systemic change through advocacy for people with physical disability. So what is systemic advocacy? Systemic advocacy is working for long-term social change to make sure legislation, policies, and practices support the rights and interests of the people that we represent. While systemic change is long-term and impactful, it takes a long time to make happen, which can be quite frustrating, but it's always worth it in the long run, hopefully. So who does it affect? Systemic advocacy affects marginalized groups who are experiencing discrimination, people facing exclusion through failures of systems, such as failures of government policies or infrastructure, for example, public transport. systemic advocacy also affects people who have fallen through gaps of existing policies. The government and decision makers are also affected by systemic change and advocacy. By lobbying and advocating for change, we put pressure on existing structures within government institutions, which in turn and hopefully sparks change in policy by governing bodies that benefits our cause and the community we are representing. We also act to inform government and politicians to issues that affect people with physical disability and act as a channel of information which can be relied upon to inform the development of new policy affecting people with physical disability or provide insight into any potential issues that have not been picked up on. This is also true for businesses and corporations. However, there's less bureaucracy and more of a focus on profitability. When approaching businesses and corporations, it's important to come equipped knowing your facts and relevant legislation, but also initially as a friend that can help be more profitable. If that doesn't work, facts and stories of lived experiences are great at sparking change by putting pressure on these businesses and industries. So what do we actually do? We collect data and stories from our members, people with lived experience of physical disability, and representative groups like MD New South Wales, or anyone who has some kind of knowledge or relationship to issues that we're advocating for. We then take these insights and come up with solutions or build a case of something that needs to be addressed and advocate to government or the private sector to agree to implement a solution to the issues that we've told them. This can take shape in the form of meeting with government officials, engaging media, and of course, keeping the community at the center of everything that we do. We work hard to engage with the community we represent as we're acting on behalf of our membership and as a voice for people with physical disability. We also work to build strategic relationships with relevant stakeholders, such as other advocacy groups, politicians, government departments, but our main goal is to always represent the interest of our membership and people with physical disability. So what can be achieved, what we are trying to achieve through advocacy is small and large scale systems change. Through advocacy and actively engaging with our community and those who have power to create change, we fight for human rights to be at the center of policy and decision making and extend that into broader society to create societal change. So what are some examples of our success? The Stand By Me campaign was a collective effort across the disability sector, calling for a strong commitment to long-term funding for disability advocacy organisations from the government. This was achieved through collective organising and the disability community making noise. This involved holding rallies in the city, sending out petitions for people to sign, writing letters to other disability and non-disability organisations and allied health professionals, and asking them for support. On the other side of things, PDCN and the organisations involved wrote policy papers and recommendations, sent letters to politicians, and met with politicians pleading our case. Meetings were held with the Ageing and Disability Commissioner, Robert Fitzgerald, and all of this lobbying, along with recommendations from the Ageing and Disability Commissioner, eventually secured long-term funding for disability advocacy in New South Wales, which is a pretty huge win for the protection of rights of people with disability. Another key win for us is the exemption for people with disability to continue to use plastic straws under the New South Wales ban on single-use plastics. So last year saw the banning of single-use plastics in shops and cafes through New South Wales. And while this seemed like a positive step in the reduction of waste, there was little thought placed on the importance of the availability of plastic straws for people with disability. This issue was identified by members as a concern that was brought to us, and we were able to advocate for the rights of people with disability to continue to use plastic straws in New South Wales through addressing these concerns and negotiating with legislators and the Environmental Protection Authority to include exemptions on the ban of single-use plastics. So how do you even start to advocate? It's pretty simple in theory. So step one, You have to identify the issue and really understand what it is that you want to change. Step 2, identify everyone who may be affected by these issues, include building an understanding of who this issue impacts, who is causing the issue, and who can create change and who you need to persuade or advocate to in order to create the desired outcome. So these would be your stakeholders. Step 3, build your case. Once you have determined what your issue is and that it's worthwhile pursuing and you know who is involved, it's time to gather data and build a case on the issue. Why it is an issue, why it is important, and what is the solution you want to see. Back up your case and claims with strong data. This is where you would go out to those affected by the issue you identified earlier, gather stories from people showing this issue as a problem for many people, gather facts and figures, either through secondary research that already exists, or doing your own through surveys or consultations or just speaking to the community. It's hard to argue with facts and figures. And while numbers give hard facts, stories bring the important emotional and moral side, and making the issue human makes it harder to ignore. Step 4 is raising awareness. It's difficult to advocate for change when no one knows about it. So this is where you take your case and your evidence and really make noise. Rally like we did for the Stand By Me campaign, talk to your community about the issue, and share your knowledge to get people talking and thinking, and brief people on what's happening and get things moving. And step 5, advocate. So engage with your community to bring this issue and the solutions to the relevant people who can make change. And keep going and don't stop until you reach your desired outcome. So what is PDCN advocating for right now? One of our key projects is around the use and supply of taxis in New South Wales, relating to issues using the taxi transport subsidy scheme and the wheelchair accessible taxis and their supply and use in Sydney and broader New South Wales. This was a regular and increasing issue that we kept hearing from our members through phone calls, consultations, and general engagement. And it's clear the taxi system is failing our community and members, so we're taking action. To start this, we built our case by gathering data through a survey of people with physical disability and their experiences using taxis in New South Wales, and engaged with members to share stories and understand the impact of these issues on people. This was collated into an experience research report. We started to raise awareness of this issue by sharing this report with the New South Wales Taxi Council and the relevant government bodies like Transport for New South Wales and the Transport Minister. We secured meetings and successfully put this issue on the radar of those who have the capacity to create change. Now we are in the advocating stage. Our case is built, and we are reliant on our community and the change makers to stay involved. This is going to involve continued engagement with our most important stakeholders, which is the people with physical disability and those affected by these issues, and the government bodies that have power in these areas. Stay tuned as we work on this issue, because it's a huge one and we're still going. Sometimes it feels like it never ends, but we're getting there. So our other priority areas are based around housing, which is at the moment we are advocating for minimum accessibility standards for new build homes to be adopted and mandated in New South Wales in accordance with the National Construction Code, which has been going for quite a few years, but getting closer. Health, where we are across the issues affecting people with physical disability, and we previously worked on getting free COVID tests for people with disability from community centres. Transport, where our main focus is on taxis, but we are also across the broader inclusive public transport area and the standards for accessible public transport. And we also work within the emergency preparedness space and have developed a website resource called I'm OK to help people with disability prepare for emergencies such as bushfires and floods. And of course, we always have our ears open and our eyes peeled to potential new issues that we can tackle. So what is the role of MD New South Wales in all this, and why am I here? So MD New South Wales is one of our most valuable relationships. While the team is obviously amazing and great to speak to in general, we rely on them as a gateway to the MD community and issues that are affecting you guys. Without the help of MD New South Wales, engaging with issues and understanding what is happening on the ground would be very difficult for us. PDCN operates well within the policy spaces and talking to government and advocating, but where it really matters is on the ground with actual people, which is where we don't have as much scope and rely on representative organisations like MD New South Wales to keep us in the loop with real life issues. At the end of the day, we need you. Without your stories and experiences, we have nothing to advocate for. Advocacy for change is about fighting for the rights of the community, and you are the community. The experiences of people with disability is what informs us to identify an issue. We use stories from people's experiences to build our cases on issues, and we engage with people on the ground to raise awareness and help us to advocate. We are here for you, and we need you so that we can do what we do. So how can you get involved with systemic advocacy? You can become a PDCN member and stay in the loop with our projects. Look out for our surveys and consultations from other disability organisations, or even just give us a call, send us an email, and I'm sure the team at MD New South Wales are happy to hear from members on issues affecting you too. And of course, you can always take matters into your own hands and advocate in your local area on issues that matter to you. If you want to reach out to us, our information is here. We also have a lot of research reports on our website, and our I'm OK website is also there for emergency preparedness. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks, Alice. It's so nice to work with you and work together on these issues. They're so important for our community, like the lived experience of people in our community and what what people go through every day. Those stories really need to come through to MD, and then we can pass them on to you, and you guys are working with ministers and with committees and giving that feedback. So I just really want to call out to our community and make sure that the next time something's really frustrating and you think, I can't be the only person this is happening to, that you bring that to us in our peer groups, through our website or through our info inbox or whatever it is. So making sure that we pass those stories on, because often the case is that when someone is having a hassle or being let down by the services or the system, basically it's letting a lot of people down. It's not just one person, it's affecting a lot of people, and we all need to use our voice, as you said about Alice. That's really, really powerful. So we've just got one question in the chat at the moment, but feel free, guys, to pop your questions in. I'm sure there's lots of issues. Maybe pop your comments in, what issues are affecting you guys, and let's have a bit of a conversation. So the first question that's come in, Alice, about the taxi industry, surprise has been affected by Uber. I think that's fair to say. In the last few years, not a day goes by that someone doesn't say to me, I'll just get a Uber, and I'll go, oh, wish I had the opportunity to do that. Have you looked into extending advocacy about Uber? So perhaps people are also having issues with Uber. Maybe Uber's not accessible and inclusive for people. So is that something that you're looking at, or really only the taxi industry itself?
So at the moment, we are looking pretty exclusively at the taxi system, but we do know that a lot of the issues with the taxis are because of Uber. So the taxis are going through a period of deregulation, and that's kind of in response to Uber becoming bigger and like something that most people use as opposed to taxis. So it's definitely something we think about when we're approaching the taxi industry, but it's difficult because it's kind of a bit of a Wild West situation for rideshare compared to taxis, which is a lot easier to kind of engage with, but it's definitely something we'll be looking out for.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I know that when I've been to Newcastle in the last, I think 5 years, they've been having an accessible Uber trial up there. For 5 years seems like a very long time to have a trial, and it'll be really, really good maybe to see. I'd obviously like the taxi system fixed first and foremost, but if taxi, wheelchair accessible Uber, I think it's called WAV, I think, Uber, if that comes to Sydney and other areas, that would be useful as well. So something to figure out, when is the government going to do a trial of that in Sydney?
It's interesting with that because Uber doesn't come under the disability standards for transport.
Right.
So if they have something like Uber Assist, they can say that it's like the person is willing to kind of come out of the car and help you into the car, but there's no regulation around actually having the right infrastructure in their car, like a wheelchair accessible taxi would have to.
Yeah, that's right. I would like to see the next Uber driver truck me into their car. That would be really interesting. Or perhaps not. So thanks, Lorraine and Di, for those comments in the chat there. But yeah, definitely watch this space and make sure. I think this is really, I guess we wanted this to be a call out to people to make sure that they do share their stories, as horrible and as annoying as they are to repeat, and actually sometimes quite dramatic, through the sharing of those stories. That is how we work for change. So, I would like to thank, I can see a couple of people in the room who've actually shared their stories, and those have been part of the feedback that's been given. So thank you to those of you who do share your stories and frustrations with things like taxis, but also the straws issue. That's something that's particularly affecting us now. It's really hard to do that, but I know that what's happened with the straws, Alice, you can get some straws from pharmacies. Is that where that's from?
You can still buy them online, but you should be able to request a plastic straw from cafes and things, but they just aren't allowed to kind of showcase them for everyone to take.
That's absolutely an issue in our community. So so thanks. Is there any other questions before we move to our next speaker? We've got a couple of there's a nice couple of comments in the chat. So Nathan saying keep up the good work, keep advocating. It's a really tiring and energetic thing to keep up, so well done. And Graham's got a comment in the chat. So he's applied for taxi subsidy, but because he can technically walk 20 metres, I wonder how long it might take him to walk the 20 metres. He got his application denied. That's really crazy. People need to understand the nature of neuromuscular conditions. There's a question there. It discounts many people who use wheelchairs while accessing the community. But there are risks, there are huge risks of falling, but also fatiguing. That's also a major issue for people in our community. So perhaps application criteria is for things like the TTSS, and I know parking issue as well. That's another big one that comes up. So interesting. I think the people who make these rules and laws and eligibility criteria really need to understand the nature of day-to-day life for people with disability.
Yeah, they're too disconnected, but that's why we're here.
That's right. We need to storm their office and let them know about our day. And then you should still be able to. Michelle, thank you, Michelle. There's a comment here. You should still be able to get taxi subsidy. So perhaps trying again, Graham, and getting a letter from a neuromuscular specialist, like a neurologist, not just a GP. So up the ante in terms of your evidence, perhaps. There's another question in the comment from Ellie. Silicone straws. We know Ellie is our resident environmentalist. So thank you for reminding us, Ellie, that there are other options for straws. There are silicone straws. So Ellie, if you've got a recommendation of good straws, please pop a link in the chat. That would be really, really great. Is there any other questions or issues at this point? before we move to our next speaker. Oh, isn't it nice to know we're not running late today? Thank you, Alice. Well done. Can everyone give Alice a round of applause? Thank you for presenting. And
thanks for having
we
me.
will be keeping in touch and make sure that we pass on all of the issues and examples and stories. I think stories is what makes like backup evidence for the issues that you raise. So really
absolutely
keep sharing those stories. So yeah, thanks so much, Alice. Well done. Thank you. All right, moving to our next speaker. So we've got the lovely Belinda McDonald. Belinda, you're here, aren't you? Hello, Belinda. I'll just introduce you. Belinda, you've got a session now for the next half an hour, but we could, see how we go with questions. You're a speech pathologist. You have worked mostly or exclusively with adults who have swallowing and communication problems as a result of different neurological conditions like stroke, brain injury, neuromuscular conditions, Parkinson's disease, MD, MS, and MND, all the M's, and dementia. So you've got a wealth of experience there to share. And you also have set up your own practice. It's called NeuroSLP in 2014. So you offer mobile and telehealth speech pathology services across Sydney and the metropolitan area, I believe. Yeah, so for people particularly who are experiencing problems swallowing and as a result of their neuromuscular condition. So we thought it would be great to hear from you, Belinda, because if you're like me and you like your food, when swallowing becomes an issue, that's a real issue. So we'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much. Could everyone please welcome Belinda?
Hello, thanks for having me. I'll just share my screen. Okay, hopefully you will now be able to see my slides. So thanks for asking me. It's a real pleasure to be asked to come and speak to you today about swallowing. I am just going to make sure that I can progress. Okay, so just before I start, I just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I work, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I pay my respects to elders past and present and any elders who might be present here today. So there's a lot to get through. I'm not going to be able to cover everything that anybody might want to know, but I'll do my best to give you a reasonable overview of swallowing and swallowing problems, with a specific focus on neuromuscular conditions. So this is what I'm going to try and get through today. We'll talk about swallowing, what it is, how it works, what dysphagia is, why swallowing problems are such a big deal. We'll talk more specifically about neuromuscular conditions and swallowing, why swallowing can go wrong, how you know if you have a swallowing problem. We'll talk about aspiration and aspiration pneumonia. I'll talk about oral hygiene and oral care, texture-modified diets and thickened fluids. You can see that I'm going to be just skimming the surface of all of these topics in the time that I've got. Positioning and other strategies during meal times. I'll touch on exercise. We'll talk about medication delivery, when to see a speech pathologist, and then very, very quickly choking and aspiration emergency management. What I won't be discussing today, though, are speech and communication difficulties, which deserves a full session all of its own. Many neuromuscular conditions impact on communication, as you well know. I'm preaching to the converted. Communication problems need early skilled assessment and management by a speech pathologist. And there are several things that we can do to help communication difficulties. I also won't be discussing swallowing, speech, language, cognitive or social communication difficulties in children with neuromuscular conditions. My experience is specifically with adults, but a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about are kind of relevant to kids as well. Okay, so let's just begin with swallowing. This is an infographic from our Swallowing Awareness Day that Speech Pathology Australia, my peak body, holds every year on March the 16th. As you can see, swallowing, we swallow around 700 times a day on average, once a minute while we're awake, about 3 times an hour when we're asleep, even more obviously when we're eating and drinking. And swallowing difficulties are called dysphagia, which means difficulty or discomfort in swallowing. Swallowing uses 26 different muscles. And in Australia, about 1 million people have a swallowing disorder. 1 in 17 people will develop some sort of dysphagia in their lifetime. And you'll see down the side, there's a bunch of percentages of different illnesses that can have swallowing difficulties as part of it. So, you know, many people with Parkinson's disease, for example, with dementia, people who have mental health conditions as a result of medications and the impact that medications can have on swallowing. And the only neuromuscular condition that's mentioned there is multiple sclerosis. But we'll talk a little bit more about prevalence of dysphagia in neuromuscular conditions in a minute. So let's just look at what's involved in swallowing when it's working well. As I mentioned, it's something that we do hundreds of times a day without really thinking about it. And it's made up of many very finely tuned and coordinated movements involving the lips, the tongue, the jaw, the soft palate, the throat, the voice box, and the esophagus, the food pipe. But it also encompasses a whole lot of other things that we don't always think about: flavour, texture, temperature of food, eating context, being in front of the telly, in a restaurant, whatever, good or bad experiences of eating and drinking particular things. All these things come into play and can influence the way that we swallow. So let's just orient ourselves to this picture. You'll see that green blob there, you may or may not be able to see my cursor. The green blob is food or drink. You can see that the lips are closed at this particular moment in the swallowing, in what's happening in this diagram. Lips are closed, the food's sort of gathered together into a ball. You'll see that the airway is open at this point. So anything can go anywhere it wants at this moment. As the swallowing process continues, we gather it up into this ball, we move it to the back of the mouth. All of that's under voluntary control, requires a fair bit of muscle coordination and strength. Then the reflex gets triggered and the food should pass into the food pipe. You'll notice here that this flappy bit of cartilage, that's the epiglottis, and that flaps down over the voice box, which rises up to meet it and helps the airway close off during the swallow. And then once the food's gone into the esophagus, everything goes back to its resting position. So you'll notice, importantly, that all of these structures are shared between breathing and swallowing. And so everything has to be timed really well to keep those two functions separate. And as we'll see in a little while, this can be an issue for people with neuromuscular conditions. So the goals of swallowing are: don't leave anything behind, make sure everything goes where it should, and keep the airway clear. Those are the 3 goals of swallowing. Okay, we'll move on to our next slide. Now, I was going to show you some videos, but I won't have time. So I might just share those links at a later time. Okay, so why is dysphagia such a big deal? Well, dysphagia can lead to serious illness, and for some people it can lead to their death, unfortunately. And I guess that's why speech pathology is important, because that's one of the things that we try to avoid. Okay, so dysphagia can lead to choking, where food or something goes into the airway and occludes your airway and you're not able to breathe. That's an emergency. Dysphagia can also lead to aspiration. So that's food, fluid, gastric contents, or bacteria-laden saliva going into the airway, which can lead to a chest infection. And that's called aspiration pneumonia. Sometimes you would think that most people would cough. Mostly we do cough when that happens, but sometimes we don't. And I'm going to talk about aspiration in a little bit more detail a bit later on. Dysphagia can lead to weight loss and malnutrition. It can lead to dehydration. If you have to go to hospital because of it a lot, you can have the risks associated with having to go to hospital. And it can also lead to a poor quality of life. So embarrassment, withdrawal, isolation, mood change, those sorts of things. So it's a big deal. This is a comment that was made during some research by the Dysphagia Research Society, encapsulating this quality of life issue. I avoid dinner with friends because it's just too embarrassing. So in the US, as many as 36% of individuals with dysphagia avoid eating with others because of their swallowing issues. So this is a big issue that can impact on all of life. Swallowing is eating and drinking meal times, they're very communal. And so if you're having trouble, it can be a real problem. Okay, so as you know, neuromuscular conditions affect nerves, neuromuscular junctions and muscles, which lead to impaired communication and control between the nervous system and those muscles. Muscles that control breathing and swallowing are often affected, and to some degree and in different ways in different neuromuscular conditions. These are some of the conditions that I researched for this talk. The ones that are bolded are the ones that I looked into in a little bit more depth. Don't really need to say much more about that. So dysphagia is common in many neuromuscular conditions. In fact, the prevalence can be between 34 and 80%, depending on the study that you look at. And in one of the studies, it mentioned that, it's probably quite underestimated, and particularly in children, what another study said. There is a significant association between the presence of swallowing difficulties and the presence of speech difficulties. So there's also a relationship between respiratory function and swallowing. And in one study where they had 222 people with different neuromuscular conditions, almost half of the people in the study had swallowing problems and 64% had pulmonary dysfunction. And there was a correlation between decline in respiratory function and swallowing function. So this means that it's important to be on the lookout for swallowing problems. If respiratory function declines for any reason, whether that's a progression of the illness or it's a time-limited respiratory illness of some sort. Likewise, when swallowing gets harder, it's important to be on the lookout for changes to breathing and respiratory function. There are a few other reasons why safe and effective swallowing might be a challenge in neuromuscular conditions. Physical positioning could be hard due to scoliosis, poor seating, difficulty with physical positioning. If oral care is not great for any reason, that can lead to respiratory compromise. If swallowing food and drink is difficult, then swallowing saliva can also be difficult. The presence of reflux can be an issue. If mobility is poor, it's hard for the lungs to clear microorganisms or anything that might have gone the wrong way. And if you're generally unwell, it does make you more vulnerable to infection. And it can lead to social and psychological consequences and have an impact on quality of life, like I mentioned before. So why can swallowing go wrong in neuromuscular conditions? Well, anything that interferes with the strength, timing, speed, and/or range of movement of the muscles involved in swallowing can lead to food, fluid, or saliva being misdirected or left behind in the mouth or throat. Respiratory muscle weakness, reflux, and physical positioning can complicate the situation. So as I mentioned before, swallowing is all about how muscles work together to move food through the mouth and throat into the esophagus. Requires timing of movement, strength of movement, range of movement, and speed. And as I mentioned before, nothing should be left behind. Everything should go where it's meant to go and not be misdirected, and the airway should be kept clear. Anything that goes wrong with any of those movement parameters can lead to a difficulty with swallowing. And as I mentioned before, the shared structures for breathing and swallowing means that every movement has to be synchronized very carefully. Airway protection is also very important. So if airway protection is compromised, then respiratory safety can be compromised. Okay, so how do you know if you've got a swallowing problem? Well, here's a list of things to be on the lookout for. And these are triggers for getting an assessment by a speech pathologist. And, you know, in saying all of these things that are on the screen, if things happen once or twice, well, that happens once or twice to all of us. It's kind of if something's really consistent. So coughing, choking, or throat clearing during or between meals is a trigger for an assessment. Recurring or unexplained chest infections, even if you happen to be fed through a gastrostomy tube. Weight loss or dehydration that's not intentional. Being a bit breathless after swallowing. Taking longer or, you know, just progressively longer and longer to eat a meal. Very slow at eating or drinking. Trouble chewing, trouble moving food in the mouth. Drooling or having excess saliva. Food or fluid coming out through the nose. The feeling of something stuck in your mouth or throat. And then sort of just making these decisions, maybe not to eat or drink in a public setting that might be different to what you would normally do. I'm just going to drill into some important topics about related to dysphagia, and let's just begin with aspiration. So aspiration, as I mentioned before, entry of food or liquid into the airway below the vocal cords. So we're talking about the function of the voice box or the larynx. The voice box is the gatekeeper into the lungs. So if stuff is getting past there, it can cause an infection, and it can be very serious. Now, 2% of the general population aspirates. So it happens to everybody. It just doesn't happen all the time to everybody. Most people cough, but some people don't. And that's what's called silent aspiration. Really importantly, aspiration does not always lead to pneumonia. You need some other things to be in place in order for you to get sick. So altered oropharyngeal flora, so bugs growing in your mouth and throat. The frequency, volume, and type of aspirated material also play a part. So how much is going the wrong way, how frequently it's going the wrong way, and whether it's reflux, saliva with lots of bugs, or water that's, you know, pretty clean. And decreased host resistance, so decreased immunity caused by multiple medical issues, reduced respiratory clearance, a whole range of things. So you do need to have a few things in place in order to get sick from stuff going the wrong way. Sort of relates now to the oral hygiene stuff. Really important with dysphagia that mouth care is excellent. If you've got unwanted bacteria in the mouth or throat and you're a bit vulnerable to aspiration, it could enter the lungs or be dragged down with saliva, food, or fluid. We know that it's a major cause of aspiration pneumonia, that poor oral care is a major cause of aspiration pneumonia. And the risk factors for poor oral health include being on a texture-modified diet or thickened fluids, needing help with eating, having a neurological impairment, being tube-fed, needing help with oral care, and having decayed teeth. So good oral care reduces the incidence of pneumonia, and access to good dental care can really help, but also can be very difficult to find a dentist who knows how to help you with your oral care skillfully. So speech pathologists, what do we do? We're university-trained allied health professionals. We are trained to assess and treat people who have swallowing problems. And we work to minimise the risk of chest infection, choking, hospitalisations, malnutrition, dehydration, and death. We are the go-to person for assessment and management of swallowing. So what do we do? When we're looking at someone swallowing, we gather all the relevant information. We look at medical history, swallowing history, weight, oral care, lung function, through reports from respiratory specialists, etc. What you're currently eating and drinking, the difficulties that you're having with eating and drinking, and that's not just food and fluids, it's also saliva and also medications. We look at the muscles of swallowing, we look at you eat and drink. If we think that we need more information, we'll refer you on to have an X-ray swallow test called a video fluoroscopic swallow study or an endoscopic swallow study. Then once we've gathered all the information and looked at what's going on, we'll form some conclusions and develop that management plan in conjunction with you and your team. We'll discuss risks and benefits of various options to make mealtime safe, accessible and enjoyable. We tailor the dysphagia management strategy to your particular situation. We might include swallowing exercises, potentially, manoeuvres for swallowing. We might make recommendations about oral care. We might recommend texture-modified diet or thickened fluids. We might recommend changes to medication delivery. And we might talk about positioning, different strategies, that sort of thing. Whatever it is, it's tailored to you and it's a team effort. And this can be a little bit of a sensitive topic for many people, but there are some people who, for a multitude of reasons, very reasonable reasons, want to eat and drink things that are considered a bit risky, in the sense that those things might create a choking risk or might put their lung health at risk. So the role of the speech pathologist in this sort of situation is to discuss all of this with you, to go through the options, explain and discuss the risks with you, and try to find ways to make that food or drink safer but acceptable. What's important is that the discussion is had, that everybody's on the same page, and that everybody's opinions are considered, and that we come up with a joint plan. All right, so another thing that we talk through with people when it's required are texture-modified diets and fluids. It's a balancing act. For example, for some people who have trouble chewing food, having softer foods can make things easier, but it's important to also maintain pleasure in eating. For other people, thick, sticky foods, while they might be easier to chew or need no chewing, can actually get caught in the throat more because of weakness in the muscles of the throat, and that then poses an aspiration risk. And that's the same with thick fluids. Thick fluids can help compensate for slow or weak movements of the mouth, but they can also hang around in the throat and not clear away easily when they're swallowed. Now, this diagram looks a bit complicated, but I've put it there because this is the standardized framework that we're using now across the world for describing and defining texture-modified foods and thick drinks. These are international standards that were implemented in Australia a few years ago, so that wherever you go in the world, the same terminology will be used to refer to texture-modified diets and thickened fluids. And you might hear amongst speech pathologists might say things like, I want you to have a soft and bite-sized diet, or make recommendations about IDSI level 5, minced and moist. That's just a brief explainer. May or may not be relevant at some point for you. So I'll briefly mention some other mealtime strategies that can be useful. Firstly, physical positioning can be important, but can be difficult for some people because of seating or physical challenges. But as a rule, being upright is best. For some people, putting the chin down towards the chest can help, but not everybody benefits from that. Some people actually need to put their chin up a little bit. But this is something that the speech pathologist will work out specifically with and for you. Many people find that swallowing twice on each mouthful can help move food and fluid from the throat into the food pipe. But some people find this too tiring. Some people find that sipping fluids when they're eating can help wash food down better. But whatever's required, the speech pathologist will tailor the strategies to suit you in your particular situation. So I get asked sometimes, can exercise help improve swallowing for people with neuromuscular conditions? Unfortunately, there is a real lack of research in this area. There's not a lot of literature about what does and doesn't work. Much of the literature talks about what we've discussed already, texture modification, positioning, that kind of thing. So in answering that question, I'll always say things like, well, there's a little bit of evidence, but not a lot, and I can't promise anything. And in some conditions, it's just not suitable to do things that might fatigue the muscle and end up causing new problems or worsening problems. So what I've said there about respiratory muscle strength training, there is a small amount of evidence for this in some conditions. A lot of the evidence is in other neurological conditions like Parkinson's disease and stroke. Some of the evidence around particularly expiratory muscle strength training in Parkinson's disease, you would think, how does that relate to swallowing? Well, when you're doing expiratory muscle strength training, you're actually engaging some muscles underneath your chin, which are responsible for raising up your voice box during swallowing. And so that's why people sort of think, well, maybe it might be useful for some neuromuscular conditions. I have used it for a few of my clients, but it's not for everybody because of the particular physiology of what's going on in particular neuromuscular conditions. I personally need medical team clearance, and we need to monitor during training very carefully, and it has to be delivered with the right dose and intensity for it to be useful. Again,
Linda, just a couple more minutes before we need to stop, please.
Small amount of evidence for tongue strengthening, but same idea, same issues. I'll just whiz through this. Medications can be hard to swallow. They can get stuck. Some medications can be crushed, but others can't. When you're having trouble with swallowing medications, you often try things like apple puree, thickened water, but these things can affect bioavailability and absorption rates. So the option is to use a medication lubricant. There is one in Australia called Gloop. Pharmacists and medical teams can recommend alternate forms, and pharmacists can also tell you which meds can be crushed and which can't. Just to reiterate, speech pathologists work as part of a team, and they're some of the other team members that we work with. Person-centered management is what we're on about. When to see a speech pathologist: if you're coughing, throat clearing, feeling like stuff's getting stuck in your mouth or throat, food or drink comes out through your nose, you're choking, you notice that you're needing more than 1 or 2 swallows to clear things away. You've got unexplained repeated chest infections or unintentional weight loss. Emergencies, this is my last thing. 3 things: choking, aspiration, something's stuck. Choking is airway occlusion. That's an emergency. Everybody should have first aid training. Aspiration, you can still breathe, but you know something's gone the wrong way. If you're worried, go to ED or your GP. First aid training as well. If something's stuck in your throat, stay calm. Try washing it through with fluids or a mouthful of food to drag it down. You can try the chin down thing. It might help because it opens up a part of your throat where something might be stuck, or you can try doing a hard swallow where you squeeze the muscles inside your throat to try and swallow it down. That's all I'm going to talk about. Choking. This is the first aid fact sheet from St. John's that I downloaded off the internet the other day, 2022. That's it.
Oh, Belinda, that is a wealth of information. Thank you so much. That was really a lot of information to cover in 30 minutes. So you've done really well. Thank you. And really on point for our community, I think. Thank you so much. Yeah, I just pick up on the point. If anyone's got any questions, please pop them in the chat there. I had a wake-up call last year. I took a Panadol. It was like a long one, not a round one. It was chalky, and I swallowed it lying down. I'll never do that ever again because I choked on it, and I just always think to myself, no way, don't try and swallow anything lying down. Thankfully I was able to I think sort of somehow my reflex worked in, and I think I moved more than I normally can move. So it was like a self-preservation exercise. It was very strange, but thank you so much. Good reminders about respiratory and swallowing and the link there. I think, a lot of our community, those issues are present, and it's really important to keep checking in on those not side effects, those symptoms that might be occurring more than once. Really, really important. All right, well, if anyone's got any questions, Belinda, will you stick around until the break after our next speaker? We might have some more questions come in the chat. That was really useful. Thank you so much, and very clearly presented. I like that. That was great. Thank you so much. All right, I'll introduce our next speaker now. This is our last speaker before our break. So oh, good feedback in the chat, very concise and useful. Thank you so much. So going to introduce our friend Jackie Russell. Jackie is the genetics and metabolic nurse practitioner at Sydney Children's Hospital. Jackie, you're here, aren't you? Yes, there you are. Hi, Jackie. Just making sure you're here. Yes, hello. Like to welcome Jackie. You've got 20 years experience working with children with neuromuscular conditions and their families. So it's fantastic that you're here with us today to talk about a whole range of things to do with reproductive issues. You've worked with people about newborn screening, gene therapy, for SMA. You've worked in a whole range of areas, and so I've asked you today to come along and talk to people about reproductive options, because this is always a topic that people raise about whether they will have children or whether they will go through IVF, will their children be tested or choose not to be tested, a whole range of things like that. So lots to cover in half an hour, but thank you so much for coming along. Please welcome Jackie Russell.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to hopefully be able to share my screen. I think. Okay, can you guys all see my screen now?
It's coming up now. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, thanks for that. So I'm a pretty competent nurse and competent genetic counsellor, but I'm pretty crappy when it comes to IT. So that was my big scar.
Well, you're very brave being here. Well done. And so far, you're going great.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for having me. So what I'm going to talk to you guys today about is from reproductive options in hereditary conditions, okay? So I'm just going to give you a very basic science lesson, okay? I've only got 30 minutes here, so I'm not going to try and cover everything, but just want to keep to the basics. If you've got any questions, I'm very happy to answer them via email or whatever over the next couple of weeks. So as I'm sure you're all aware, DNA is the blueprint of our life. It's a set of instructions that make us who we are. So we get our DNA from our parents, and we share our DNA with our relatives. And nature's pretty good, but it's not perfect. And sometimes we find there are little mistakes in the code. So there are two types of DNA that we have. The most common one is the nucleic DNA, and that's what we find in the nucleus inside our cells. But we've also got mitochondrial DNA. Now, I'm not really going to talk about mitochondrial DNA today because we don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to focus on the nucleic DNA because that's that's what we have most of our DNA, and that's where we see most of our conditions inherited. Okay, so nuclear DNA, as the name suggests, it's found in the nucleus. So the nucleus is like the control center of the cell. That's where all the instructions come from. So for our nuclear DNA, we get half from our mums and half from our dads. So the DNA is packaged as chromosomes, okay? And I'm sure you've all heard about chromosomes. And as humans, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Okay, and I'll show you a picture of this in a minute. I know this is just a bit wordy. So the first 22 pairs of chromosomes are arranged in order of size. Chromosome 1, the biggest, down to 22, which is one of the smallest. And they're called the autosomes. And autosome is just a medical word that means non-sex chromosomes. Okay, and the autosomes are the same between males and females. It's that 23rd pair, which is the sex chromosomes, that determines if you're male or female. So while the DNA is packaged as chromosomes, the genes are the little individual set of instructions that make us who we are. And we have 20,000 pairs of genes. And again, they come in pairs because you get one from your mum and you get one from your dad. We all have about probably 10 to 15 of those 40,000 genes that have what we call a pathogenic variant. So we used to call them mutations, but now we call them pathogenic variants. And the reason for that is because as we've done so much more testing over the years and our knowledge has increased, we realize that we've got not just pathogenic variants, but normal variants as well. That's just evolution. That's who we are, okay? So a pathogenic variant is a variant that can potentially cause a problem, okay? So a normal variant is just like how I like to think of it as how Americans spell words slightly differently to us. So if you think about if you read a book that was published in America and your brain sees the word recognize, it will notice that there's a Z there instead of an S. Now you'll look at that and go, oh, that's interesting. This book must be published in America. But you still understand what the word means. We've all got lots of variations like that, but it's the pathogenic variants, the ones that cause the problem, that we worry about. So this is a picture. As you can see, this is a cell. So inside the cell there, that's the nucleus. So that's what the nucleus looks like. And they're the chromosomes. And so the chromosomes, all it is just DNA that's very tightly wound up. So if you were to look down the microscope at the nucleus, what you would see is all of the chromosomes just jumbled up together. And it looks like a big bowl of worms. So what we can do is match them up. And when I was back at university many years ago, you used to have to do this by eye. So it was pretty hard because you would have to take a photo from the microscope and then you would have to cut out the individual chromosomes and match them up into their pairs. But now it's all done on computer, so it's much easier. But as you can see, these are the 22 pairs that I was talking about. These are the autosomes. So the biggest ones here and the smaller ones down here. Now, I'll let you know just a little as a little aside that they actually got it wrong, that chromosome 21 is actually smaller than 22. But as I said, someone did that by the eye, their naked eye, just comparing a photo. So it's pretty good. They got it almost right. And it's this 23rd pair here. So this is a male because there's an X and a Y. If there were two X's, then that would be a female. So that's what our chromosomes look like. Okay, so if we talk about the inheritance of neuromuscular disorders, okay, neuromuscular disorders can be caused by pathogenic variants in the nuclear DNA, okay? They can be caused by different types of inheritance, which I'll discuss in a minute. But neuromuscular disorders can be genetic but not inherited. And that's one of the most common comments or questions that I get when I see a family with a child with a diagnosis of a neuromuscular disorder is, but how can this be? Because we have nobody in the family that has anything similar to this. And I'll explain a little bit about that as we go on. But if you're going to do some genetic counselling and have some reproductive options, which include testing or IVF, you need to know the exact genetic change. Okay, so that's a really important thing to remember. And so that's one of the reasons why people with neuromuscular disorders see somebody like me, so we can help get to the bottom of it. Okay, so the first type I'm going to talk about today is autosomal recessive inheritance, okay? So autosomal means that the gene is on one of those autosomes, so one of those 22 pairs of chromosomes. And as soon as you hear the word autosomal, it should trigger your brain that it is equally likely for boys or girls to be affected, okay? The recessive word means that you need pathogenic variants in both copies of the gene for you to have the disorder, okay? In this case, we find that the parents are both healthy carriers, okay? So the parents have 2 copies of this gene. One is fine, but one has the change, the pathogenic variant, okay? And what happens is when they have children, you only pass on 1 copy of each gene. And if both parents pass on the copy that has the change, then that child doesn't get a good copy of the gene. They don't get a backup copy, and they can have the disorder. When we talk about autosomal recessive conditions, there's usually no family history at all. And that's because if you go back and test lots of people in the family, you'll find that there's lots and lots of healthy carriers, but no one's either had a partner that's also a carrier, or if they are a carrier, they were lucky enough to have had a child that wasn't affected, because it's a 25% recurrence risk, or a 1 in 4 each time you have a baby. So it doesn't mean that your first child you have is affected, so then the next 3 are going to be fine. It's just like tossing a coin every time you have a child, because you can't control which copy of a gene that you pass on yourself. It's completely random. Okay, so when we talk about autosomal recessive conditions, the most common one in the neuromuscular spectrum, of course, is SMA. So this is how SMA is inherited. So when I see families of children who've just been diagnosed with SMA, when I test the parents, I usually find that they're both carriers. But nobody else in the family has been diagnosed, because it just starts to appear in this one generation. So here's a little picture now that can hopefully illustrate what I just said. So as you can see at the top, you have the 2 parents. Okay, and the lighter shaded bit is a copy of the gene that doesn't have the change, and that does have the change, and the darker one is the copy with the change. Okay, so you can see here the first option, both parents have passed on the good copy, so that child is not affected at all. In this second one here, dad passed on his good copy, but mum passed on the copy with the change. So that child would be a healthy carrier, just like mum and dad. The third possibility is that dad passes on the copy with the change and mum passes on the good copy. That child, again, a healthy carrier. The last possibility is that both parents pass on that one with the change, and there you see is an affected child. So that's how we get a 1 in 4 or a 25% recurrence risk. Okay, and as I said, there's nothing you can do yourself to control which copy of a gene that you pass on. The next type I'm going to talk about today is autosomal dominant inheritance. Again, autosomal means that it's equally likely for boys and girls to be affected, but dominant is different from recessive in that you only need 1 copy of the gene to have the pathogenic variant. Okay, and that's because the copy that has the variant is dominant over the good copy. Yep, so that's when we talk about autosomal dominant inheritance. Usually in this type of inheritance, we find that one parent is affected. Okay, so there often is a family history with autosomal dominant conditions. However, sometimes you can find that it's a new change that just happened in the sperm or the egg that went on to make that person, and nobody else in the family is affected. Okay, that's what we call de novo. So de novo means new. So if you ever hear that term, that's what they're referring to. So conditions that are autosomal dominantly inherited, there's a 50% recurrence risk. Okay, and that's because the affected person has 2 copies of the gene, and it's just a 50-50 which one they pass on. So the most common example in the neuromuscular cohort that we see of an autosomal dominant inherited condition is myotonic dystrophy. And I'm not sure if there's anybody in the audience today who has myotonic dystrophy in their family or has a child with myotonic dystrophy. Sometimes when a child is born with myotonic dystrophy, we often diagnose it in the parent, which is quite a shock for a lot of people, because autosomal dominant conditions can be very variable, and a lot of people can be very mildly affected and not even know that they're affected. Okay, so a pictorial way of demonstrating that is just what I've got up now. So again, you can see that it's the father in this instance who's affected. So he's got 2 copies. The orange one is the copy that's fine, and the blue one is the copy that has the change. And as you can see from this, it's just a 50-50 which one he passes on. And again, there's nothing that you can do yourself to control which copy of the gene that you pass on. So the next type of inheritance I'm going to talk about is X-linked. Okay, so as you can probably figure, this is the type that where you find the gene is on the X chromosome. Okay, and as you know, females have 2 copies of the X chromosome, but males only have 1 copy. So that is why females are usually healthy carriers, because they've got a backup copy, but males are affected. And of course, the common one that is a condition that's inherited in this manner is either Duchenne or Becker muscular dystrophy. So, and Duchenne and Becker, when I first started, they actually thought they were 2 separate conditions, but now people realize they're just different ends of a spectrum. But the dystrophin gene is found on the X chromosome. Okay, so that's why, as a genetic counselor, when someone comes to see me with an X-linked condition such as Duchenne or Becker, I'm very interested in the females in the family, because they can be carriers for this and not even know. Sometimes, however, we can find that females are affected, and usually it's very mildly. But sometimes we can have females who actually have Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And the reason for that is because as women, we only actually need 1 X chromosome. So what we do, our bodies are pretty clever. In our cells, one of the X chromosomes is switched off, because we only need 1. And it's a very random process, and it's pretty much 50-50. So in about 50% of a woman's cells, she'll have 1 copy of the X chromosome working, and in the other 50%, she'll have the other copy working. However, sometimes that can be skewed. So you might have a woman who has 40% of her cells containing 1 X chromosome working, and then the other 60% have the other. And you can see how that can become a little bit of a problem if your copy of the X chromosome that contains the dystrophin gene that has the pathogenic variant is switched on in enough of your cells. It can start to create a bit of a problem. And this is why for women who are carriers of dystrophinopathies, so Becker or Duchenne, we like them to go and see a cardiologist, because we want to make sure that they get their hearts checked, because the heart's a pretty important muscle and we want to make sure that it's working fine. Okay, so with X-linked conditions, the recurrence risk for a female carrier is 50% in her sons, because she's only got 1 copy of the gene to pass on. So she either passes on the good one or the not. The interesting part, though, with X-linked disorders like this is you never see male to male transition. And that is one of the biggest questions, most common questions I get asked by boys and young men with either Becker or Duchenne. If I have children, will my sons have this condition? And the answer is no. You cannot pass it on if you're a male. And that's because your sons will get your Y chromosome, not your X. Okay? So if we have a look at this as a diagram, and we can see over here, we have a male who is affected. So that's an affected father, and his partner has 2 normal copies. So for males who have an X-linked condition like this, all of their daughters will be carriers. Yeah. So if you are a male who has either Becker or Duchenne, all of your daughters will be carriers, but none of your sons will be affected because you will pass your Y chromosome on. Okay. However, if you are a female and you're a carrier, it will just depend which one you pass on. So if your partner passes on his X chromosome and you pass on the good X chromosome, then that daughter will not be a carrier and she'll be fine. If dad passes on the Y and mum passes on the good copy, then that's an unaffected son. If mum passes on the copy that's got the mistake and dad passes on his X chromosome, then that child will be a daughter who's a carrier. And if mum passes on the one with the mistake and dad passes on his Y chromosome, then that child is an affected boy. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So that's the different types of inheritance that we've discussed. So what are the options for future pregnancies? Well, there currently in 2023, there are 3 different ways that you can have a pregnancy. Okay, the first way is through a natural conception. The second way is through an IVF pregnancy where you test the embryos. And the third way is to use either donor sperm or donor egg. Okay, so if you're going to do a natural conception, in amongst that category, there are another couple of options for you. So the first option is to do absolutely nothing. No testing during the pregnancy, no assisted reproduction, nothing. For some families, that is the best option for them. And that might be because of religious reasons or moral or ethical reasons. And sometimes it could be because they've been trying for many years to have a pregnancy and they've had multiple miscarriages. So they don't want to do any testing in the pregnancy because every time you test a pregnancy, you are increasing the risk of a miscarriage. So an example of this could be now spinal muscular atrophy, SMA. So if I have two parents who both know they're carriers, we now have a treatment, an excellent treatment for SMA. So it is now an option for parents to not do anything during the pregnancy. We can test the baby as soon as they're born. And we are very lucky in New South Wales that we've had newborn screening for SMA for the last 5 years. And then we can test the baby as soon as we know. Okay. Some people think that genetic counsellors have an agenda, that we're all about testing and, terminating pregnancies. That is not what we are about at all. We are about helping you to make an informed decision about what is best for you. And if what is best for you is to do nothing, then we will support you the whole way. We will support you all the way through the pregnancy. We will support you all the way through the delivery and anything that comes after that. And if anyone tries to make a judgment on you, tell them to go and mind their own business, because it's no one else's business except yours.
Jackie, just 5 more minutes and then we'll have time for questions, if that's okay.
So the next option is to do what we call a CVS, or a chorion villus sampling. And I've got a picture to show you that in a minute. Or you can do an amniocentesis. And both of those are testing during the pregnancy. So this is a picture of a chorionic villus sampling. Okay, so what they're doing under ultrasound is going in and taking a tiny piece of the placenta. okay? Because the placenta has the same DNA as the baby. This is done about 12 weeks into the pregnancy. And you would know 12 weeks in whether or not the baby is affected. And then you could make a decision to either stop the pregnancy, or you might make a decision that at least I know now, so I can put some options in place for when the baby's born. But as you can see, you're actually entering the uterus at 12 weeks into the pregnancy. So that is why there is a risk of a miscarriage. It's operator skill dependent. So if you were to take this option, it's best, we would recommend that you go through one of the big maternity hospitals that do have a feto-maternity unit. The next one is the amniocentesis. This is done at about 16 weeks into the pregnancy, whereas you can see under the guidance of ultrasound, they go in and they take some of the amniotic fluid. The baby at this stage is bigger, so there's less risk of a miscarriage, but still a risk of miscarriage. But what they can do is test the baby's skin cells that are now floating around in the amniotic fluid. And again, you would know if the baby is affected, and it can help you to make some decisions. The next one is the IVF procedure. So it's pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. So a normal IVF procedure happens first, where the egg and the sperm come together. It's called ICSI, which is intracytoplasmic sperm injection. It's just a fancy medical word for putting the sperm and the egg together in a test tube. That embryo then grows up for a few days and has some cells. They can take a cell out and they can test to see if the baby is affected. The problem with this method is that it is expensive. It's only recently been available as a subsidised service through the Royal Hospital for Women, but it's not very pleasant. I don't know if you know people who've been through IVF. It's a lot of medical procedures, it's a lot of injections, but you're pretty confident you're going to get a baby at the end. And that's a really good option for people who don't feel they could terminate a pregnancy. The last one is using donor gametes. And by gametes, we mean sperm and egg. And this is a really good option if you actually don't know what the genetic basis is. Because as I said before, to do testing in a pregnancy, you must know what the genetic variant is. It is actually much easier to get a sperm donor than an egg donor. However, please don't use a relative. And the reason why is because, as I mentioned before, we share DNA with our relatives. So if you don't know what the genetic variant is, please don't use a relative. The disadvantage for this is that one parent will not be a what we call biological parent. And some families feel strongly about that. Just wanted to very quickly touch on preconception carrier screening. So as I said before, we're all carriers for something, and most people don't even know what it is until they've got a family history of a disorder or if they've undergone preconception carrier screening. You can screen before a pregnancy. You can do it either individually or as a couple. So some couples like to undertake this kind of screening so that they get told what they're at risk of as a couple having a baby with. So it doesn't give you your individual results. The things to remember with this is that it's only a screening test. It's not 100% accurate. It's not as accurate as actually testing the pregnancy. And it's currently only available in the private sector. Okay, but some of you may have heard of Mackenzie's mission. So Mackenzie Casella was a little girl who had spinal muscular atrophy who came through the hospital here at Sydney Kids, and her parents didn't know that they were carriers for SMA. And unfortunately, Mackenzie was born before treatments were available, so she passed away. But what her parents, Johnny and Rachel, did was they advocated to put in a preconception carrier screening program in Australia so that couples have access to that information before they plan a pregnancy. And that's called Mackenzie's mission. We've done the pilot study for that, and we're now in the process of trying to convince the government it's a good idea to pay for it. So I just always like to mention preconception screening because I think it's very valuable to understand that sometimes you can actually have two genetic conditions running in a family. So it would be such a shame if you just did testing or IVF for one condition and then found out that you guys were actually carriers for another condition. So it's always good to keep it in the back of your mind. Okay, and that is it for me. So are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Jackie. That was really great, very clear, and it's hard to make sense of all of that science, but I think you've done really well, and it's really great. So thank you. We did have somebody who wanted one of your slides, so I've just let everybody know that the recordings and the slides will be on our website next week, and I can certainly they'll also be sent out as an email next week, so everyone will get that information, including all those diagrams that make sense of things. So yeah, that's great. Is there questions from the audience? There's always questions about this stuff, so I hope that there are some questions.
Carolyn, it's Jessica here. We might just ask Jackie to stop sharing his screen.
Oh, that's a great idea. Thank you.
As I said, great nurse, terrible with IT.
No, I think you've done really well, Jackie. And I like that you actually went into the hospital. So you've got like a really scientific background in your presentation. So that was very, added to it. Yeah. Someone's got is that a hand up? No, I didn't see that. That was my cursor. Is there any questions? Surely we have some reproductive questions, or people are always asking. Yes, Gabrielle, lovely.
Hi, thank you so much for that, Carolyn and Jackie. At what point do you speak to couples? Like, is it when they're like ready to have a baby, or just thinking about it, just wanting to gather information, not ready yet? At what stage?
Whenever they have a question.
Yep. Okay.
So it can be at any stage.
Okay.
So here, obviously, I'm attached to the Neuromuscular Clinic. So we see families when a children's first diagnosed. And then we stay involved in genetics. We call it from womb to tomb. So at any stage, very happy to answer any questions. One of the very few benefits of COVID is the advance in sort of telehealth and sort of online technology. So I've done lots of consultations with other family members. So siblings of parents, I've organised testing for them. I've organised information sessions for them. So whenever anyone has a question, you just pop it through. So, and I'm always happy to talk. And if anyone's got questions today that they don't want to share with the group, I'm very happy to be emailed. So Carolyn has my email address. So if anyone wants to ask me anything, please get in touch, because very happy to help.
That's lovely, Jackie. And I'll just also add to that adult neuromuscular clinics can refer you to a geneticist or a genetic counsellor. Is that right, Jackie?
Yep, that's 100% correct. There's quite a few genetic services, and there are actually now a few private genetic services as well. But for most genetic services, like as myself, I'm a genetic counsellor. I see people outside of clinic time all the time. So hopefully there's no waiting list for you. But yeah, just contact your local genetic service. So hopefully someone can see you pretty soon.
Well, that's great. We do have a question, Jackie, in the chat there from Jessica. She said that thank you for an insightful session. And what is the time frame of undergoing pre-screening testing? Is it a long process?
No, it's so most people these days, when you're planning a pregnancy, go and see your GP and you ask, lots of questions like, what is my, chickenpox status, et cetera, Our hope and plan is that this will be something that a GP will be able to organise. But most GPs at this stage are not fully aware of this. And again, that is part of what we want for Mackenzie's mission, to get it out there so GPs are aware. There are some private companies. Your GP can refer you to a genetic service, and we can put you in touch with the private companies. But usually what it entails is you sending off a sample, usually saliva, and it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to get a result back. There's one particular company that we use, and I don't have a commercial agreement with them. It's called Invitae.
What a shame, Jackie.
I wish. It's called Invitae, and they're an excellent service. They are an American company, but it's very user-friendly. And as I said, for people like me who are not very good with technology, they have an excellent website where you don't need a doctor's referral. You can just organise it yourself. You spit in a jar, you send it off, and then you get a result within about 2 to 3 weeks. Now, the only problem with that is you don't get access to a genetic counsellor. So you might need somebody to help you interpret the results, which again, any genetic counsellor can do. There's another one here based in Australia called Sonic, and a lot of obstetricians organise that for their patients through Sonic. And again, the problem with Sonic is you don't get a genetic counsellor to help you interpret the results. You just get a report. But again, any genetic counsellor would be very happy to go through those results with you.
And I think there was a follow-up question from Gabrielle about needing a referral for seeing a genetic counsellor.
For seeing a genetic counsellor, no. For seeing a clinical geneticist, yes. So a clinical geneticist is a doctor, a medical professional who, if you want it through Medicare, you will need a referral, but not to see a genetic counsellor. Okay? So if you did want to see a genetic counsellor, my advice would be to contact your local genetic service. There's an excellent website, which is the Centre for Genetics Education, which lists all of the genetic services in New South Wales. And a genetic counsellor would talk to you on the phone and talk to you through the process. But to see me as a genetic counsellor, no, you do not need a referral.
Thanks, Jackie. So helpful. And also people can contact MD New South Wales either through our social media, an email, or giving us a call. So we're happy to refer people to those types of services as well. So thank you so much for the questions. That's great, and really great session, Jackie, very informative. As I said, we will get the slides and the presentations, the recordings up on the website, and they will be sent with a link to all of the participants. So wonderful. Can everyone give Jackie a round of applause, which is really strange when it's all on mute.
It is.
We can see lots of claps, so that sounds a bit like in the deaf world, isn't it?
Yes.
Put our hands up for clapping. Yeah, wonderful. And thank you. Big thanks to Michelle, to Belinda, and also to Alice for their wonderful presentations this morning. I hope everyone got something out of it.